Let that be. Okay. Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode titled Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
We are doing Lawrence of Arabia, bitches. It's here.
For once, the episode will not be as long as the movie, I don't think.
God bless, I hope not. Loved it, but it's a long movie. Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
This movie and episode contain depictions of and or references to war, violence, colonialism, sand, imperialism, noble savage Arab stereotypes, rape, sadomasochism, use of a form of makeup known as brownface to make actors of white European descent appear to be members of a race that they do not in fact belong to, and no woman.
No women. Rena, can you give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources used in this episode include The 7 Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence, Hero, The Life and Legend of Lawrence of Arabia by Michael Korda, Israel, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth by Noah Tishby, David Lean, A Self-Portrait, which is a 50-minute documentary that a friend recommended it to me. I also looked at some articles in the New York Post, Al Payas, and several others just to dig into a bit on David Lean and Peter O'Toole. We also listened to a bunch of podcasts, including the Empire podcast, an episode of History Hit, an episode of In Our Time from the BBC, and the Unspooled podcast, which features a superior film historian to myself on Lawrence of Arabia. It's Paul Scheer and Amy Nicholson, who is the LA Times chief film critic. They watch movies that have had a cultural impact and talk about them. It's a really great podcast.
Interesting.
Yes, strong recommend. And their episode on Lawrence of Arabia was really quite good. And those are our sources.
Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about the movie Lawrence of Arabia?
Of course. Lawrence of Arabia is a 1962 epic biographical adventure film directed by the one and only David Lean. It is produced by Sam Spiegel through the British company Horizon Pictures. It was distributed by Columbia Pictures. It is based on the life of T.E. Lawrence and his 1926 book, 7 Pillars of Wisdom. Lawrence of Arabia introduces us to Peter O'Toole as Lawrence. It also features Alec Guinness, Jack Hawkins, Anthony Quinn, Omar Sharif, Anthony Quayle, Claude Rains, Jose Ferrer, and Arthur Kennedy. And the screenplay was written by Robert O. and Michael Wilson. I think that the greatness of this film is pretty self-explanatory if you watch it. I think like the best way to watch this movie would be on an iPhone, but we did happen to see it at the Paris Theater. You just couldn't fake any of the things you see in this movie back in the day.
Oh.
Everything we see is real in that someone built it, or God or science or whatever put it on this planet in order for it to exist so David Lean could shoot it. I have a bunch of red threads to pull on here in my talk about this film. So we first have a throwback to Trumbo. Michael Wilson, one of the screenwriters of this movie, was blacklisted shortly after he won an Oscar 10 years prior for writing A Place in the Sun, which is one of my favorite movies ever. And he also wrote for the King brothers during his exile. He was uncredited for writing Bridge on the River Kwai, this, and movies for William Wyler, Otto Preminger, and Dino De Laurentiis. I'm going to cop to a few mandala effect things here. So first, I was looking for George Kennedy, who plays the American Dream living baggage handler to President of the Airline in the Airport film series, but that is not who Arthur Kennedy is. And I also thought that T.E. Lawrence was the same person as D.H. Lawrence for a long time. And so I spent a lot of years being like, homeboy was a mercenary available for foreign war commission, and he wrote the sexiest books in history. Like, how does one find time to be so multifaceted? They are not the same person. Nope. Nope. This movie was also, like I should mention too, it was shot in a thing called Super Panavision 70, which was the best of the best technology available at the time to make crazy big films. It had only been used a few other times before this in the film The Big Fisherman, Exodus, and West Side Story. 70 millimeter film was the most sophisticated film product at the time, allowed for wider frames and a richer scope. They needed special optics to project 70 millimeter prints onto these curved screens. This movie was also a big game changer in Hollywood. You know, we've watched a couple of roadshow movies in our time on this show.
Mm-hmm.
This was a very modern for the time movie to take place in this epic format. Because if you think about it, World War I was as far removed from when this film came out as like the 1970s are to us now. So it was a very recent movie in terms of the time frame in which this was made to, you know, where they were in the 60s, which is kind of mind-boggling. Also, a couple other things. So Albert Finney was almost cast as Lawrence, which would have been his breakout role, but he did not want to sign a long-term contract with Sam Spiegel, so he didn't take the part. They also apparently looked at Anthony Perkins. Marlon Brando almost had the part. In Montgomery Cliff, we're all like in the conversation. So we're like an Air Bud and LL Cool J away from making this the most like disparate group of actors to be considered for this role. And, you know, and when the movie came out, everyone was all like, Peter O'Toole does look like Lawrence, which I disagree with in some regards.
Peter O'Toole was 6'2". T.H. Lawrence, I've seen 5'5", I've seen 5'2", and when he was stressing out over his campaigns, his weight might go as low as 80 pounds. He looked more like an elf of imperialism than like Peter O'Toole.
I was gonna go Mary Lou Retton.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it is a major case of U 2.0, the phenomena where whoever plays you in the movie is better looking.
To be fair, though, no one looked like 1962 Peter O'Toole except Peter O'Toole. He is a very pretty man. Noel Coward actually quipped after seeing the premiere of the film, if he had been any prettier, the film would have been called Florence of Arabia. Alain Delon was almost cast as Omar Sharif. Also very pretty, also very not Arab.
Yeah.
Like, very.
So this is 1960 or 1962?
Came out in 62, so 60, 61.
And I should have remembered that because this is a We Didn't Start the Fire mention. Lawrence of Arabia, British
Beatlemania, Old Miss, John Glenn, Lifton Beach Palace, and yeah.
Paul Malcolm X,
British politician, sex, JFK, blown away. Okay.
This is 6 years after The Conqueror, so at least they cast an Egyptian as an Arab in one case. They have an Indian man playing an Arab. They have Spanish guy playing a Turk. The thinness of how marginally better they are than The Conqueror at what we now call representational casting is negligible. But I do have to give them some credit for at least casting an Egyptian as an Arab.
They're getting warmer.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the two people here who really matter most in all of this. First, as I mentioned, the legendary David Lean. So David Lean started his career as an editor. He edited about 24 movies before he started directing. And he started directing in collaboration with Noel Coward. The first movie that David Lean had a directing credit on was a pretty kind of propaganda-ish British movie that came out in 1942 called In Which We Serve, which came about because Noel Coward had been asked to make a movie for the war effort, and he was like, no, thanks, I'm good. But then he had dinner with Lord Mountbatten.
Dickie!
And he was very taken with Lord Mountbatten's stories about commanding a military ship, HMS Kelly. So the movie is loosely based on his experiences with that. And hey, you know who made their film debut in this movie in which we serve? Richard Attenborough.
Oh.
So you had asked the world and me how Richard Attenborough could make such boring movies.
While we were sitting at Lawrence of Arabia, I think it might have been as we were coming back from the intermission, I posted to our Blue Sky account, how does Richard Attenborough manage to be so boring in a world where David Lean has already existed?
And I have a theory here now, which is that not unlike De Niro made a Bronx Tale, and a Bronx Tale feels like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of Goodfellas, where he's trying to do all the things that Scorsese does, but it's not quite right. I think that we can also say Richard Attenborough is a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of David Lean.
Yeah.
I've got notes for Oscar-winning directors on this show, something I'm very qualified to offer. So David Lean showed a really strong instinct during the making of this movie for directing action scenes. And David Lean is kind of the godfather of so many things that we see in movies that I would call it, I'm going to use a term I use around the house, which is the Lethal Weapon paradox, because I saw Lethal Weapon after I had seen every other movie it inspired. And I had to remind myself when I was watching it that everything else was hackneyed and Lethal Weapon was doing something original-ish. And when you watch a David Lean movie and you've seen a bunch of other stuff, which the odds are good that you would have seen a bunch of other stuff before you see a David Lean movie, you're kind of like, oh, that's where that came from. We don't have The English Patient or The End of the Affair Without Brief Encounter, which is just one example of a movie he made. And a casual observer of David Lean's work might notice that he was kind of affected by World War II. And I am announcing another round of 6 Degrees of Alexander Korda this week.
Yay!
We don't have Raiders of the Lost Ark or Star Wars without Alexander Korda. You have a word on Alexander Korda.
There was an Alexander Korda T.E. Lawrence movie that never got made, which I learned about from Michael Korda's book. You discovered that Michael Korda is Alexander Korda's nephew, which I'm assuming must be how he knew this story. And I love this, that T. Lawrence was concerned that anyone who bought rights to his work and made a movie about him would tack on a heterosexual love story where there's the girl who he's thinking about, and there was no the girl. E.M. Forster observed, this guy isn't anything. He's been mentioned as gay, but the word asexual didn't exist at the time. He hated being touched, although he would pay people to whip him, which we will get to. That does not happen in this movie. At any rate, he spoke to Alexander Korda about, I don't want my story being made into a movie if someone's going to tack on some stupid love story with a girl who never existed, which, as you know, this is one of my pet peeves. But Alexander Korda, who had good taste, told him, no, I'm not going to do that. And then the Korda film never got made.
David Lean, because of circumstances and the time in which he started making movies, was, confined to a comparatively intimate scale of movie making to where he would go. He actually made 3 movies with Alexander Korda, including his favorite movie that he ever made, Summertime, with Katharine Hepburn, which was shot entirely in Venice. And he was on location for the first time in that kind of way. And it was the first time he had a film that was internationally financed. And suddenly there was possibility, and he had such an exquisite gift for having the landscape play a character. And because of that, Bridge on the River Kwai really gave him that additional passion for shooting in what he called exotic locations, which was then followed by Lawrence of Arabia. Spielberg is heavily inspired by the work of David Lean. You see Raiders of the Lost Ark and every other Indiana Jones movie all over this movie. You see pretty much every Lawrence of Arabia shot in Star Wars.
I kept thinking, this looks just like Star Wars.
There's so many cool things that happen that I'm going to get to in a moment. David Lean was also really inspired by other directors' works. He watched The Searchers in order to get a sense of they're shooting some of these bigger, massive landscapes. And you see that all over this movie as well. So, a couple other things. This was a very tough shoot. David Lean was in the desert for over a year. Peter O'Toole was often drunk because that's what Peter O'Toole does, including he was drunk for the raid on Aqaba. So was Omar Sharif. O'Toole suffered from third-degree burns, dislocations, sprains, bruises, broken bones, and even a deviated spine. Don't know how much of that was self-inflicted or the result of his bad behavior. He and Omar Sharif would travel to Beirut when they had a few days off where they could drink and party hard.
Beirut used to be called the Paris of the Middle East. There are postcards from the 60s of women riding water skis in two-piece swimsuits that say "Wonderful Beirut" on them in big yellow letters.
I mean, it's a good thing societies don't go backwards, right?
Sure, societies never go backwards, Sarah. Only
it can't
forward.
happen here. So David Lean is he's a director's director. My sweetheart, Marty, has described this movie as feeling a little bit unfinished and just scenes feel unfinished. He loves this movie, but apparently he was tinkering with it in his mind and up until the day he died. He shot 33 miles of film, which turned into roughly 4 miles of film, the finished product. And Marty and Steven Spielberg really supported the restoration that helped this movie be rediscovered by people who want to make movies. Bosley Crowther, who we talked about in Bonnie and Clyde, and he still had his job as the lead critic at the New York Times. When this movie came out, he said a lot of good things, but he also said it was a, quote, huge thundering camel opera that tends to run down rather badly as it rolls on into its third hour and gets involved with sullen disillusion and political deceit. I'd like to shout out yet another brilliant female editor, Anne V. Coates, who was also inspired by the French New Wave, like Didi Allen, as we talked about in Bonnie and Clyde. She won an Oscar for editing this. She also would go on to edit Beckett, The Elephant Man, In the Line of Fire, Out of Sight, What About Bob, and 50 Shades of Grey. Editors often edit all sorts of things in their lives. That is a really lovely looking movie, so I will give her credit for that. So those are just some of my notes on it. We'll get to the rest of it in awards talk. Rena, can you tell us a little bit about Thomas Edward Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia?
I would be delighted to. Noah Tishby has a nice, succinct 2 paragraphs on Lawrence and his life prior to World War I, so I'll use that as an intro and then get into anecdotes and a bit more about him. Thomas Edward Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, was born in 1888 in Tremadoc, Wales. From a very early age, Lawrence knew he was different. He was smart and observant and already interested in archaeology at age 15. After graduating from Oxford University with a degree in history, with a focus on Crusader castles, he traveled around the Middle East on archaeological excavations. Graduated in 1911, and he got a job at the British Museum on an archaeological expedition to the northern Syrian site of Carchemish, which was under Ottoman control. As only one of 2 Westerners on the site, he didn't simply dig into the ground, but also into the traditions, lives, and culture of the locals. He became fluent in Arabic and would often visit his fellow workers in their homes, learning the nuances of Arab life and unknowingly preparing himself for his extraordinary future. Lawrence loved the Middle East so much he would stay in Syria even after the digs closed for the summer and his archaeology boss and mentor Leonard Woolley returned to England. Going back a bit, Lawrence is a bastard. I'm not talking about in character. His father and his mother were not married because his father ran off with his children's governess, who became T. Lawrence's mother. And his father has, at least 8 children overall. So his father was an Irish Protestant baronet, and he talks about this, that he can't inherit the title in the film. But at that moment, I just wanted to hug him and tell him, it's okay, in 100 years, nobody will care if your parents were married. You'll be able to say your parents weren't married, and they'll be like, cool, they couldn't marry because his dad's real wife wouldn't give his mother a divorce, and he didn't quite know the nature of it. He thought that perhaps his mother was his mother, but his dad was not his real father. And unfortunately, people were all about shame then. So we already spoke about the physical differences between Lawrence and Peter O'Toole. It must be a hard thing for a man to lose 8 inches. Sorry, I had to say that.
Yes, you did.
He was brilliant at archaeology. He was fluent in Arabic. And in this movie, of course, they're only speaking English, and these language things are always awkward to handle. So this film focuses in on one highly eventful period within his life where he is working with the Arab revolt against the Ottomans. And to deal with anything touching on the modern Middle East is to open a can of radioactive worms. Not only are the plentiful worms in the can radioactive, they have python fangs and are infected with Ebola, AIDS, polio, smallpox, measles, tuberculosis, tetanus, the Black Plague, diphtheria, whooping cough, mumps, and a vicious strain of COVID-19. And those worms will stay alive just long enough to bite whoever opens that can, having been genetically modified to give these diseases to humans, which is especially inconvenient now that if nobody is vaccinated. I meant now that nobody is vaccinated.
Yes, this is the worm inside RFK's brain, I think.
Possibly. So, for some background, I'm about to say something that might be controversial, which is that colonialism is not strictly something that Europeans do to people from other continents. In this case, the Ottomans colonized the Middle East. So that's Turkey. Turkey is the rump of the Ottoman Empire. They colonized the Middle East, but also the Turks committed the Armenian genocide. And for other instances, for example, the Mongols invaded Hungary earlier. If you look at empires that stay around longer, for example, there were Middle Eastern and African Roman emperors. Colonialism is not strictly a Europe on other places thing. It is a power thing. So, the Ottoman Empire has been ruling over the Middle East for hundreds of years, and they've had a decent run of it, about, 500 years from start to winding down. And also the Turks colonize Greece and Bulgaria. The Arabs, who we see in this film, are rebelling against the Turks, but we're going to find out the British aren't actually there to help. The British are there because they want to maintain access to the Suez Canal so that they can get to their big colony in India faster.
Hold on a sec. I just want to make sure I'm processing this information correctly. Are you suggesting that a country would get a foothold in another country not because freedom, but because money?
Yes.
What? That's impossible.
Remember when Alana was on a couple weeks ago and I talked about how I wished that I had a magic wand that could turn everyone into a secular pluralist? I wish I could remake all of history so that we had more Marshall Plans and less exploitation.
I feel like maybe it would benefit everyone if we were all more honest about our motivations.
Well, the British want an excuse to stay in the region. We're moving into the era of car domination, so oil will become a thing. But the British priority here is getting easy access to the Suez. So this is about one empire taking over the leavings from another empire.
Sounds like history.
So the Ottomans make the decision to side with Germany in World War I. Dumb choice. I learned in my AP European history class that World War I started because of that ever-popular automobile maneuver the K-turn.
Based on what I know from watching television about World War I, it seemed like a good idea at the time to side with Germany. Obviously, it wasn't. I know that, like, every time there's a presidential debate, like, the question comes up, if you had a time machine, would you go back and kill Hitler?
Sarah, do you remember that Moshe Kasher joke about how Hitler turned out so bad because he grew up constantly dodging assassination attempts by time traveling Jews?
Oh, I do.
I love that one.
I have come to the determination that maybe someone should have gone back and made Archduke Franz Ferdinand pack a lunch. Then we wouldn't have had World War I, and then we also wouldn't have had to have World War II.
Right.
Hitler would have just been like a frustrated artist and probably a shitty podcaster.
My favorite World War I quote: "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime."
I don't know how they had more people to put into World War II, like, because of, like, the number of people. I've just always found it kind of astonishing that they didn't literally run out of people to feed to the war machine, because just the body count in that war was so insane.
So we do not hear the words Sykes-Picot until quite late in the film. The truth is that Lawrence knew about the Sykes-Picot Agreement way earlier than they make out in here. And the preface to his book, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, is basically, we suck, we lied, we're betrayers, and we suck. But more eloquently put than that. So what is Sykes-Picot? Sykes-Picot is so universally reviled that I cannot think of another case of unity so great other than the Do Not Call Implementation Act of 2003, which passed 95-0 in the Senate and 412-8 in the House of Representatives, and authorized the FCC to create and enforce the National Do Not Call Registry, which means the Sykes-Picot Agreement is as popular as telemarketers. It is reviled and blamed by everyone, from the most ardent Zionists in the Knesset to members of Al-Qaeda. What is Sykes-Picot?
Yes, that was my next question.
So Sykes-Picot is an agreement made by Sykes, an Englishman, and Picot, a Frenchman, for Britain and France to divide up the Middle East after World War I, after they've beaten the Ottomans, since the Ottomans are defeated, and when you defeat someone, you have their land. Sykes-Picot itself is never enacted, but the effects of Sykes-Picot are enacted in something called the San Remo Agreement. But yes, it is basically the British and the French saying, here's how we're going to divide everything up. And it very much contradicts with all the promises that Lawrence is making to the Arabs.
They were just like two dudes, right?
They're just two dudes.
Yeah, they're like the Brian Fellows of diplomacy, not necessarily people who should be trying to enact global policy.
So much of, when you look at a border on the map of the Middle East, this is just lines that the Brits and the French sat down and drew. And what it reminds me of is a satirical play that I saw about 20 years ago about Robert Moses, in which they showed a child who resembled Tiny Tim from A Christmas Carol planning the route of the Cross Bronx Expressway by throwing a bowling ball into a model of the Bronx.
Not wrong.
So that is what Sykes-Picot is, which you hear mentioned quite late in the film, and boy, did it fuck shit up.
Anyway. So as I mentioned, we had to take the second best way to watch this movie after watching it on an iPhone, which was seeing it at the Paris Theater in a remastered print and surrounded by people who were super excited to be there.
It reminded me that I love movies. Like, if you live in a place where you have any access to getting to see classics on a big screen, please do so at least once in your life. It's amazing, and we don't we don't know anymore what the experience of seeing so many of these things was like. Every shot of this is so beautiful. And yes, it's 4 hours, but I was riveted every second. And part of it was that immersive experience, but I was never bored, which is a big order when you're making a film this long.
Honestly, I would guess that if I had watched this at home, I would have had to like take a break, maybe cut it into a couple of pieces, just because the immersion of being surrounded by people and being surrounded by this movie and the music and everything about it was so awing to experience. It was such a treat to see this in that way.
It was incredible.
I don't know where this is on your own personal like film journey. I don't know how I did this, but I guess like it was never assigned to me in school, and I never got around to sitting down and watching this movie because I was always sort of overwhelmed by the length of it.
Yeah, I've never seen it, but I feel like if you can binge watch Netflix, you can watch an epic.
Oh, for sure. I was always like, oh gosh, 4 hours. Tombstone's on. I'm a little embarrassed that I hadn't seen it.
It's okay. I hadn't seen it because I was saving myself for seeing it on a big screen. And I knew people had always said, like, do not watch Lawrence of Arabia on TV.
No, and also like watching it with other people was made it really special too. Like it.
Also, this is we didn't start the fire thing. If you were a kid around the time that We Didn't Start the Fire came out, basically every social studies teacher in America was like, oh my gosh, it's a way to get kids to care about history. And they would have different kids in the class each pick a different thing. I pulled the Bay of Pigs invasion, and I had a front page where I drew the outline of Cuba in crayon with American soldiers standing on it crying. And you've seen what my drawings from these projects look like. Like you saw my crayon drawing of the Boston Massacre, where it just shows the Brits violently shooting at the Americans, and that is not how it went down.
Oh my god, that's amazing.
My Bay of Pigs cover.
Yeah.
So in my head, I have this story
so
about you.
Accurate.
In my head, I have this story of you getting your assignment, which I know is not true because you have told me several times, but I still have it in my head and want to quote it before I remember. No, Sarah's actually told me that this didn't happen, which was that when your class all got randomly assigned things from We Didn't Start the Fire, you pulled British politician sex at the inappropriate age that we were at the time and had to explain to your mother who Christine Keeler was.
I know. I wish that was true. I think I did explain who Christine Keeler was because I took it upon myself to find out what everything was that he mentioned in that song because I was cool.
We still have not actually started talking about anything that happens in this 4-hour movie.
Yeah, we should probably get cooking on that.
So we open on a man and his motorcycle. This is Peter O'Toole as Thomas Edward Lawrence. This is the most riveting footage I have ever seen of a man walking up to his motorcycle.
Yeah, it's quite the motorcycle ride he goes on. Is this a good time for me to talk about my hate boner for Peter O'Toole?
Sure, I just wanted to mention that, like, Lawrence did not care about stuff, but he always had to have, like, the fanciest motorcycles that were made. He loved motorcycles, and he is not wearing a helmet.
Nope. Wear helmets, kids.
1935, and yeah, we haven't started making people wear helmets.
You should always wear a helmet. We know better now. As I mentioned, I do not care for Peter O'Toole. We touched on this in the Beckett episode. My problem comes down to how disrespectful he is because of his behavior that is constantly painted as charming. He was drunk all the time, which, as I said, I don't care. Like, be drunk, like shoot up PCP. I don't care. Like, I'm not here to addiction shame anyone. But you're going to drag other people down with you and get them drunk. Like, Just like don't make it everyone else's problem.
Yeah, we
Also,
had some stories in the Beckett episode about Peter O'Toole and Richard Burton's behavior on the set of Beckett, which I won't find them and quote them again. They're in there, and you should go listen to that one. But pretty obnoxious stuff, and you were very upset on behalf of the line producers.
yeah, I totally was. And I remain that way. The stories that we told in the Beckett episode, like there's stories like that about every movie he is in. Like where he took out his co-stars and got them all drunk at lunch, and then nobody could work for the rest of the day. Or, he was going out partying and getting arrested. Like, it's not cute, and yet it's presented as delightful. Another thing, he really liked to improvise, which David Lean does not like. I get it, like, people like to improv, and there are some sets where that is acceptable, but if a director doesn't like it, don't fucking do it. In the documentary I mentioned up top, like I would say that like my takeaway from that is that David Lean has a work ethic that rivals Robert Caro, which, by the way, I am still reading The Power Broker. They were laying out what he does, which is he writes whoever he's writing the film with. Then he sits down with the screenplay and he writes out all of the shots and what they're going to look like and how he's going to communicate those words in visuals. And then he films. That's a multi-year process. David Lean also, based on the way he speaks about things, like has an enormous respect for every part of the process of movie making. He talks about the costume makers, the work they do to make costumes look lived in, and the art direction and the role that he has in working with the art director and letting them be creative and hearing from them, like how to work with the extras, how he works with the writers. He actually quotes Alexander Korda and in a conversation he had with him where he talked about another director basically saying, like, this fool thinks all he has to do is direct the actors. And David Lean thinks of directing as orchestrating everything and being mindful of everything and respectful of everyone's work. And then you see in this movie, there are shots that are astonishing in their enormity and what they communicate. There's hundreds of people. There are hundreds of camels and horses in scenes, and there's so much happening. And you're going to be the douchebag who's improvising, even though all of this stuff needs to happen in a shot. Like, don't be that guy. Don't get drunk.
Idea why anyone lucky enough to have a speaking role would ever improvise. Like, real life is way too unpredictable. I would love to have a script. Actors get to have a script.
There's a story that they were telling on the Unspooled podcast where Steven Spielberg asked him once about resetting the shots for some of these quarter-mile long shots of people riding on camels. And you see the sand in front of them is untouched. And like, if they had to retake that, 100 people had to come up and dust the desert with palm fronds to make it look good again. And you're going to have the temerity to fuck around and be drunk and make up your lines.
Was it just that people could get away with more back then, or is there something that magic about O'Toole?
I personally don't see it. And yes, here I am, talented performer that I am, critiquing Peter O'Toole's acting. I don't find him to be the kind of truth-telling performer that I like to watch. I always feel like he's hiding rather than revealing himself as a performer. And like he was,
function of that acting styles have changed, though.
I'm sure it is, and I am sure also it is very much a Sara problem. It is not a Peter O'Toole problem.
Yeah, well, I find him very, very watchable, but he's like not my favorite or anything. Well, this also led to a conversation about how very different our taste in men is, because you primarily like weird Jewish character actors, and I like tall, lean, waspy, pretty boys for the most part.
Yeah. He's not for me. He was basically like Jonathan Depp before Jonathan Depp. He was abusive to his wife. We saw that he was married to Sean Phillips in Beckett. And their marriage ended because she found out he had bought a mansion in Puerto Vallarta and was living there with a Mexican woman 20 years younger than him. And this is after a decade plus of being married to him and like dealing with the arrests and the car crashes and the drunken abuse. I don't care for this behavior. I don't find him charming. And when you have this many people working on something for this long, like, don't be that guy. Okay, that's my rant.
That's your rant. We've gotten up to his motorcycle ride. So he rides down a country road with goggles on but no helmet, swerves to avoid two boys on bikes riding towards him, and goes flying into the bushes where he dies. We learn that the dead blonde man is T. Lawrence, a man so important that he merits a bust and a memorial at St. Paul's Cathedral. They act like this is happening right away, but IRL, Lawrence's funeral was at a parish church that held about 170 people, and the memorial happened in 1936, while Lawrence died in 1935. A reporter on the steps of St. Paul's questions a bunch of people, including General Allenby, on Lawrence. The impression is that he was unknowable, and we find ourselves in World War I Cairo, where Lawrence is an insubordinate, wayward spirit with a fondness for putting out matches with his fingers. So we know immediately he's a little bit off, he doesn't care for formalities, and he's someone who sees the world differently.
This is a very, very, very Indiana Jones, where we're seeing that he is mercurial, and when he gets called aside and they're like, we're going to send you to the Arabias because we need you to connect with Prince Faisal, who is played by the very un-Middle Eastern Alec Guinness.
In brown face.
Yeah. Brown face.
The brown face in this movie.
There's a lot of brown face. There's like Middle Eastern nose face.
Is that Anthony Quinn's actual nose?
That is not Anthony Quinn's actual nose. There's, I guess it would be like stereotype face.
Well, look at a picture of the guy he was playing.
Yes, he looks like him, but just because it's Anthony Quinn, I'm kind of like, did we have to go that far? Like, here's the thing, like David Lean has a tiny bit of a track record of never being afraid of a prosthetic nose. Which is a huge bummer.
We've talked about this, though, that it's one of those things where you find prosthetics distracting, but I find it more distracting if someone doesn't look who they're playing. And I generally don't notice if something is a prosthetic. I would be more distracted if they didn't have like the specific nose or ears or whatnot of whoever they're playing than if I'm looking at a prosthetic.
Yeah, but he wasn't.
You're never going to persuade me unless it's an especially bad example of a prosthetic. Unless the prosthetic is like the wrong skin tone or just looks like styrofoam, I'm not going to care. I'm just going to appreciate, oh, they made him look like whoever it is.
I felt like because most of us don't know who this guy is in the first place, like, why did it matter? We're already doing brown face. And we have a Lawrence who is a foot taller and a billionty times more beautiful because it's Peter O'Toole than Lawrence. Like, why is this like our logic line for verisimilitude? Why is this like where we're like, but let's pump the brakes. We have to make him look exactly like this guy. And that means slapping a giant fake nose on him.
And I didn't mind. I like that they did everything they could to make him look exactly like that guy.
I guess this is one of those things, too, that could have been fixed by casting someone who at least seemed like they had been to the Middle East.
They cast Omar Sharif. There was like, we have one person from the Middle East in a movie about the Middle East. What
else do you want?
What strides in casting we've made since The Good Earth and The Conqueror.
Yeah.
Yeah, The Good Earth, which should have been Anna May Wong's Oscar.
But instead, it was Louise Rainier's second Oscar, I believe, right? Yeah. Anyway, she was foreign. She crossed an ocean to get here. What more do you need? Anyway, he's sent on a mission to find Prince Faisal.
Yeah, and he negotiates for more time because they want to send him for like 6 weeks when he won't even get there in that time.
So he gets a guide. who he's very for someone who is part of a hostile takeover of he's incredibly respectful of the culture.
Lawrence spoke fluent Arabic and several local dialects. And also, he feels genuinely shitty about the lying and Sykes-Picot. And we'll go into how this affects it, that he has a massive guilt trip about it. And look, the guy is a masochist, but we can go into how his life after the war, it seems like a long round of self-punishment for messing this up. He says he'll have the same amount of water as the guide. Like, he wants to do everything properly. And Lawrence had started wearing Arab dress years before the war because it's super freaking hot in the Middle East. And actually, those robes are quite cool. But I don't know. I don't know how we can say, within the context of the film, I don't know how we can say cultural appropriation when it shows them basically shoving them at him.
I think I expected to feel like he was a cultural appropriator going into this movie, but he really wasn't. There is like a white saviorness to him, but it doesn't bear out in terms of how he interacts with people. It's more Avatar than Dances with Wolves.
God. Yeah, and he's very respectful toward the guide. And we meet Omar Sharif when he shoots the guide for drinking at his well after he's said that, like, oh, the people who have this well are filthy people.
Yeah, not until Scream do we have a character who is introduced so lovingly and then dispatched so quickly. I was like, this guide is surely going to be with us for the, oh no. But then, like, hello, Omar Sharif. Holy crap. I've seen Dr. Zhivago. I've seen Funny Girl. I have read the bridge column in the newspaper. I knew like he was dreamy, but holy crap, in this movie. He just like whips that scarf off his face, and I'm like, oh, hi. Can I have your babies? So dreamy in this.
He and Lawrence start trading insults because
Yes.
Lawrence is quite disturbed that Omar Sharif shot his guide, and we learned that he's been educated in Cairo. He makes quite an impression. And this is a composite character of a number of men that Lawrence worked with. And you know how I normally feel about composite characters, but it's Omar Sharif and Lawrence of Arabia.
It's fine. It's fine. There's overtones in this movie that feel a little gay.
Well, no women. Which as I've said, I would rather have no woman than a tacked on love story.
Indeed. And it's not quite like Spartacus level, but it's close in terms of homoeroticism. David Lean was asked by the Washington Post in 1989 if we were supposed to gather that. And he said, yes, of course it is, throughout. I'll never forget standing there in the desert once with some of those tough Arab buggas, some of the toughest we had, and I suddenly thought, he's making eyes at me. And he was. So it does pervade it, the whole story, and suddenly Lawrence was very, if not entirely, homosexual. We thought we were being very daring at the time, Lawrence and Omar. Lawrence and the Arab Boys. Sorry, I had to do that in my accent there. So we were supposed to pick up on that.
What a meet cute. He shoots his guide.
It's kind of hot, though, because it's Omar Sharif. Like, I'm going to allow it.
So he keeps journeying into the desert until he reaches this place where there are echoes. So he's singing some old Oxonian song, because that is what he is, when he runs into a character I'll call Other British Guy.
Yep. Other British guy. He meets Faisal, and his mission is serve as a liaison between the Arabs and the British fighting against the Turks.
The other British guy is kind of tone deaf, but Lawrence can quote the Quran, and he and Faisal have a little talk together. And at what point do we meet the two boys who become his servants, Farouche and Dawood?
Everyone's sitting around chilling, and then these two boys sort of sneak in, and they're fascinated by Lawrence, probably because he's Peter O'Toole. and he's like tall and beautiful and blonde. They sort of start to like sneak around and follow him, and they're pranking the other British guy, and Lawrence kind of adopts them.
Yeah, they offer to be his servants. He says, I don't need servants.
Everybody needs servants. What are you talking about?
I would love to have servants. Have you seen the state of this apartment?
Same, girl.
He wanders off, sits down on a rock, stares all night, and they're watching him, and then he sits up and says, Aqaba. He can take Aqaba. Faisal gives him Omar Sharif and 50 men for this crazy plan where they have to cross this desert, and it's super strenuous. What he says to them is, nobody thinks that people are going to come from behind to take Aqaba. Their guns are trained on the sea.
It's a brilliant maneuver. It's also incredibly insane.
Yeah, because they could all die of dehydration. Like, they have to worry about the camels dying. Oh my God, the camels in this movie.
I cannot believe that no camels were hurt during the making of this movie.
Some notes from Seven Pillars of Wisdom about this trip in the desert that I wanted to share. I think there's some allusion to the snakes, but Lawrence does not like snakes.
Hey, you know who else hates snakes? Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Wonder where they got that idea.
So he writes, a strange thing was the snake's habit at night of lying beside us, probably for warmth, under or on the blanket. When we learned this, our rising was with infinite care, and the first step would search round his fellows with a stick until he could pronounce them unencumbered. Our party of 50 men killed perhaps 20 snakes daily. At last they so got on our nerves that the boldest of us feared to touch ground, while those who, like myself, had a shuddering horror of all reptiles, longed that our stay in Sirhan might end. So snakes laying down next to them. But what I really love here is the story about them using explosives to heat eggs for breakfast.
Seems a little excessive. I mean, I don't know my way around a kitchen very well, but...
So they see some ostriches. A man ran up to us with 2 great ivory eggs. We settled to breakfast on this bounty of the Beseda and looked for fuel, but in 20 minutes found only wisps of grass. The barren desert was defeating us. The baggage train passed, and my eye fell on the loads of blasting gelatine. We broached a packet, shredding it carefully into a fire beneath the egg propped on stones, till the cookery was pronounced complete.
That's a method.
Yeah, well, they're hungry. We see that Farosh and Daoud are like walking directly behind camels to try to sneak up, and that this is when he takes them on as his servants. There's this one guy who is played by an Indian actor who tells him, no, they'll be lucky for you. Nobody likes this guy, really, who they discover is lost. And Lawrence goes back into the desert to search for him, and it's baking hot. And I think this was the point where you were clutching my hand in the theater because we're so scared for them.
I was like, Lawrence is obviously going to live. Like, there's, 3 hours of movie left. But I was captured by the magic of movie making in this sequence. You get a real sense of the vastness of things from the way that Lean shoots all of this. A lot of this movie is looking at people riding stuff around. Like, there is a lot of quiet action of that sort, of people riding. And this gives you a sense of the danger. And it's also predecessed by, I want to say, like probably 10 solid minutes of shots of Lawrence riding and Omar Sharif looking back at him like, you idiot, what are we doing? He failed to give him like just enough dirty looks to get Lawrence to cut the shit for the rest of the movie. He's just like, dude, we're going to die. We're going to die. But yeah, he goes back and he gets this guy, and it's so hugely triumphant.
And he's had these dialogues with Omar Sharif about, nothing is written, or about destiny. He rescues the useless lost guy, and everyone is stunned. And this is when he really becomes like one of them in the eyes of the group, and they give him the robes.
I thought this was interesting too, because I thought that this was going to pay off later in a way that it absolutely did not. He could have died. and he took it upon himself to go back and save this one dude. I was like, this was also like an expression of them being like, you are a good leader and you made a tough decision and showed true leadership. Everybody's happy. And yeah, and he's got his robes and he's kind of starting to get high on his own supply. He's starting to become really impressed by himself, more so than I think he even was at the beginning of the movie, because he's like, look at me walking over water like the white dude that I am.
He's like posing in the robes and like bowing in them and swooping, and we're like, yeah, Florence of Arabia. And this is when we meet Auda.
Yes, because we have another fight over water.
This reminded me of Dune.
Yeah.
Where the Freemen are all talking about the water because after the Duke has died, where they're upset that how many lives they've lost, and they're trying to negotiate with the Freemen, and they're at a cultural misunderstanding. And then finally the Freeman tells it, oh, why did you not tell us it was a water matter?
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed that Dune looks a little bit like this movie too. So we meet Anthony Quinn and his fake nose. And he's very charming in this movie. And he convinces Auda to join forces with them because he is envisioning this future of Arab tribes being united together to join forces to build out their nation. Like, this is some good old-fashioned nation-building stuff that we're doing here.
And the Ottomans have been oppressing everyone for hundreds of years, and he has a vision of creating an advanced nation state that will be respected.
At this point, like, we've got all of our troops together, but then useless guy we found in the desert kills one of Auda's men, and the consequence for this is death. They're talking about it, and Lawrence is like, I'll do it.
Right, because if a member of one tribe executes a member of another, then you have a blood feud. And Lawrence said, but I'm not a member of either, so this ends with me, and we can keep going to Aqaba if I kill him. And they're like, right. And he's like, okay. And then he walks up, and it's useless.
This useless guy.
The character's name is Qasim. Yeah, it's useless guy, the man he saved.
So here's where I thought this was going to pay off differently, and that he was going to have pretend to have shot him and been like, see, this isn't the solution. We're going to make this work. No, Sarah and her.
And he isn't very competent at killing him either.
No, he shoots him like 16 times, maybe less. He unloads the entire clip on him.
Yeah.
And he's quite dead. Oh, there's no negotiations there. He didn't like shoot a shape around him or anything. We continue on our journey, and he seems to be like a little torn about this. Ultimately, like, no, I did what I had to do. He will later confess that he really enjoyed killing.
It doesn't seem like he's enjoying himself here.
He will later say, like, oh, it's kind of cool actually to kill someone. Which, like, oh, okay.
When he's saying that later, it's to General Allenby. And he's like, I killed 2 people. I enjoyed it. The general and the other powerful British government guy in the office are sitting there looking at him like, yeah, so? Is there something more here? You killed a couple people. Okay, that's not that many. You've done a thing that this is just something we do. Like, they're waiting for him to go on, and he has this talent for the things that they do. He doesn't have the right degree of the right kind of sociopathy to hold high power, or he recognizes it in himself and he hates it.
He's crazy, but he's not crazy that way.
These are their guys where it is their job to kill on behalf of their country. And they have to not make a fuss about it because there are thousands of people answering to them. If they get emotional every time that someone dies because of them, like, they'd be completely incompetent at leadership.
I would be so bad at this. Like, the shit I get worked up over.
Did you clock that in that scene where he's like, I killed someone, I enjoyed it, and they're like, and? Like,
yeah,
is this supposed to preclude us giving you further responsibilities and upping your title and having you continue with this thing you did? Like, they're just like, and? huh?
Yeah, I clocked that they were sort of like, what I'm not a priest. Like, what do you want us to do with this information? Like, it's fine. I did very much clock that they didn't give a shit.
Why he was so upset, because it's their job.
Have this, like, just this utterly incredible sequence of them riding into Aqaba, which is probably one of the most famous parts of this film. I'm saying that because it might be the most famous part, but I also do reserve some space on that list for the blowing up the train business. This is an exhilarating sequence of riding on camels into Aqaba, and they take the town and are pretty excited about it, and they're like, we did it. And Lawrence is being like, holy shit, I did another thing that's insane. And Auda has been promised that there's gold and there's just paper money.
He doesn't get it. I'm here thinking, like, dude, the gold standard doesn't really have very long to go in the world. I'd like a one-act play where John Maynard Keynes magically shows up and Lawrence tries to, like, translate him explaining why the gold standard doesn't matter, but I didn't get that.
It would have been entertaining. Not really David Lean style, but it would have been delightful.
You could have Keynes and Milton Friedman arguing various reasons, because those guys do not mesh, but just various reasons why the gold standard doesn't matter and Alda should be happy with all the paper money that he's angrily flinging away. So unfortunately, the telegraph is broken while Alda's men are rampaging, and Lawrence says, pity that, trying to send a telegram. So Lawrence makes a decision to cross the Sinai with his two servant boys so that they can get to Cairo to tell the British that they have taken Aqaba.
Another wildly irresponsible choice on Lawrence's part.
Yeah, but he's also like, they said he couldn't cross one desert. Like, they should probably take a break for a bit, maybe. Like, you just crossed a desert.
Yeah, like rehydrate.
Yeah, but he says, but Moses crossed, and so unfortunately, Dawood dies in some quicksand on the way to Cairo.
It's awful.
And Lawrence loses his compass. They make their way to the Suez Canal where they signal, and then they make their way into Cairo and to the British headquarters that Lawrence had left at the start of the film. Nobody recognizes them, so it sort of reminds me of Odysseus coming home, where it's been so long and everything's so different, or at least he's different, and nobody spots him because they're like, what are you doing walking in? And he walks up to the bar and he demands lemonade. He announces that they took Aqaba, and they're like, everyone's like, what? And he's promoted to major, and he meets General Allenby.
He's also like, oh, you did violate sort of, you did kind of go against the orders that you had, but it's pretty cool that you did all this stuff. So what do you want, to go back out there and keep fighting this war? And so he's like, I want dynamite, and I want, an armored car, and I need guns, and they get all this.
Yeah, and he asks for all of this stuff, and Allenby's lying about a bunch of it, and the British want an excuse to stay in the region so they can control the Suez because it's their quickest route to India.
And we also meet the journalist who is going to start telling Lawrence stories, and he's following them around and kind of commenting on all of the action. And we cut to them blowing up train tracks.
Lawrence is peaking here. Like, everyone's cheering him. He is just lapping it up.
He is Billy Crudup in Almost Famous, I Am a Golden God, on top of that train. And the news guy is getting pictures of it and writing it all down. And everything is just going great.
The last Turk alive shoots at him, but it just grazes his arm. And then Auda rides up and chops off the guy's head with a sword.
Yeah, Auda does a lot of head chopping in this movie.
Yeah.
This was like a golden era of romanticizing war. Like, even the soldiers themselves tended to romanticize it. The journalist also is motivated by the idea of, like, we need to get America to fight in World War I, which, if you watch the wonderful American Experience series on World War I, you see what a battle this was in the U.S., where people were very torn about whether or not they should get involved, all the way up to President Wilson. They go on like adventures, blowing up train tracks.
Somewhere along the way, Farouche dies. Lawrence has to shoot him because they can't leave him for the Turks to find. So he says Dawood will be mad at you.
Yeah, we have like a really a good moment where Faisal is talking to the journalist, and he is explaining the disparity in numbers of injured to dead, and saying that they will not leave anyone alive because of the torture they will endure if they are captured by the Turks. And then we fly too close to the sun. Lawrence and Ali go to scout a city, Darat. Lawrence gets captured, and I wasn't clear on whether they knew it was Lawrence. Like, was he famous? Like, was he like James Bond or Captain America or something like that?
So there is a price on his head that starts off in the low hundreds, and it reaches 20,000 pounds.
That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money now.
Yeah, there is a serious price on his head. He claims to be Circassian, but he's taken to be tortured, and he's whipped, and
he's very clearly raped. Like, they don't tell us that because they couldn't tell us that then, but they walk us right into it. And Ali rescues him.
Ali kind of finds him, and they go to a cave, and I don't understand why it's snowing, because I probably don't know enough about the geography. Because I know it snows in Iran. It occasionally snows very lightly in Jerusalem.
Yeah, because that happened in the book, in the story, when baby Jesus was born, right? It was snowing?
Yeah, when Santa came to deliver the baby Jesus.
Yeah, and there was no room at the inn. Government overreach at its finest with the census.
Yeah, there was no room at the inn, so Mary had the baby in Santa's sleigh.
Yes.
Lawrence is super traumatized, and he's telling Omar Sharif, and he's pointing out, like, I'm white, this should be your thing. There's a point where he goes back to Cairo, and he says, just give me work that any man could do, and you see him trying to fit back in with the other Brits, and it's just awkward.
He didn't really fit in with them to begin with, and now that he's like, I was a god, and now I am not a god, and now I just want to be a normal dude.
He's never gonna be a normal dude. There's a conversation he has with Allenby at one point where Allenby is telling him, every schoolboy will know your name when you can only see mine in war museums. You are this thing that you're trying to run from. And what it reminded me of was the scene in Kill Bill where he tells Uma Thurman, no matter how much barbecue you eat, you'll always be a killer.
He is truly this visionary, and he has to own that, and he's not cut out for a normal life. Here we have the film's weaponization of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which, as you mentioned, he knew about, but this is where he finds out about it. Lawrence is urged to support a final push to Damascus in order to win that city.
In terms of this push to Damascus, Lawrence has the idea that if he can get them into Damascus and get what they'll have to recognize as a government in charge, and to get Faisal there, there'll already be a government that they have to recognize, and it'll throw the whole thing out of order. So what he reminded me of here the most was Elizabeth Taylor in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, where she's lied and told Big Daddy that she's pregnant, and then she tells Paul Newman that he has to have sex with her so that they can make the lie true. And that is how he is trying to get out of the moral mess and the lies that he's created around Sykes-Picot.
Interesting gambit, and it shockingly doesn't go that well. But they do take the city.
And actually, in the book, there's some beautiful passages about everyone partying at the Turks finally being gone. Before that, there was the no prisoners scene.
Yes. Can we talk about that,
yes,
please?
Let's talk about that.
What the hell is going on there? Can you walk me through that?
He's traumatized. Remember, there was that one guy who runs out and gets killed ahead of them?
Yes, because
In the book, it's actually much worse because they find a bleeding, dying child who like keels over in front of them, and it's that guy's village, and like she might have been his people. And I don't know if that's just too much for David Lean to show. It's a small kid. It's like it sounds like it's like 3 or 4, and it's wandering around looking for its mother.
I mean, it
It's
sounds,
a deeply affecting passage.
yeah, they did make it clear that it was his people. That was enough, I guess. It would have been awful to see that.
David Lean probably had very good reasons for choosing not to film that part is written.
That would have
Lawrence
been,
seems really shell-shocked was the
yeah,
term
that
that
would have
he
been
used to use.
super, super, super grim in a movie that is very sad.
Omar Sharif is like sticking by him, even though it's, nobody knows how to deal with the other person's trauma. We didn't talk about Jose Ferrer.
So here's some fun trivia on Jose Ferrer in this movie. He didn't appreciate the fact that his part was so small, that he accepted the role only on the condition of being paid $25,000, which was more than O'Toole and Sharif combined made. And he was given a Porsche. What he ultimately felt like that it was the best performance he ever gave. And Peter O'Toole once said that he learned more about screen acting from Ferrer than he could in any acting class. He was very proud of the work that he did here. I can see where he would show up and he would do the work and he knew how to hit a mark. I'm sure that it was super educational for someone like Peter O'Toole, who was not used to movie making and was used to being on screen. He had made a couple of films, but not anything like this. I can't even imagine he probably got paid $12,000 to do this movie for a year. Yikes.
So he was drunk on the set for this. I get being messed up after you're big, but
It's a bold choice to be drunk as a skunk in your star-making role.
it's crazy. Lawrence is shaking, and he's like not the same after what happens to him at Dara.
And I don't blame him for being traumatized. Okay, so we take Damascus and he's like, okay, we got to get this government set up, and it's kind of a disaster.
They're all yelling at each other. No one can agree on anything. Services are falling apart, and all the things that he's trying to put in place to get the British to respect them, it's not working out. Lawrence goes to a hospital, which he's been told is a disaster zone, and boy, is this a disaster zone. And someone from British military personnel shows up and like yells at him, not realizing that this is the great Lawrence of Arabia. Later on, he'll run into this guy who won't recognize him and will say, "I'm so honored to meet you, sir."
Lawrence puts on his British military uniform again. They drive him out of there, and it's like, your adventure's over, sir.
Who's sort of learned to not trust anyone and maybe never did to begin with, makes some kind of deal with the British. So he'll be king there for a couple years, and they make him king of Iraq. And Faisal will die in the 1930s, although his brother's descendants are still kings of Jordan.
Good for him for surviving it, I suppose.
And in real life, Faisal and Lawrence were closer than is shown here. They don't go into when they show up to the Paris peace accords later to no real effect. Movie's over. We didn't quite dissect as in depth as we usually do because this is a 4-hour movie, but also a lot of it is just scenery.
My favorite part of this was looking at it. It wasn't necessarily the story.
I know I have the hindsight to know that this is to no avail, and you're taking part in making a mess that will really be our undoing in the West over the century to come. He senses it, which is part of why he goes so off kilter.
It's kind of a bummer to see because you're like, oh yeah, this doesn't go so well at all.
Yeah, and this is me going like, God, we need more Marshall Plans and less exploitation.
Yeah.
So, do you want to hear about what happens to T. Lawrence after the war?
I would love to hear about that.
So, he is given some kind of seat at Oxford where He's supposed to write his memoirs, and he doesn't know what to do with himself. He tries, like, some undergrad pranks. At one point, he kidnaps a deer. And Winston Churchill asks him, "Can you just give us a year of your life to be useful?" And he says, "Okay." And they're paying him the equivalent of about $120,000 a year. At one point, Lawrence takes it into his head to join the RAF, except he doesn't want to go in at anything like the capacity that he has. He wants to go in as an ordinary enlisted man. So he has to pass the physical, and he's going in under an assumed name. He's actually making a big headache for people in power because he barely passes the physical at all. He has bad teeth and he's old. Basically, every time something doesn't go his way, he goes up the chain of command. Everyone is like, "Yeah, we don't know what's wrong with T.E. Lawrence. You should just, like, give him something useful." It sounds almost like what people do when someone's on suicide watch. He turns down honors. There's this one point where he goes to meet with George V, who is the great-grandfather of the present king. George V keeps handing him medals and he keeps passing them back. But Lawrence wants fame and honors, but because he's such a masochist and because he feels so guilty, he feels this drive to turn them down. That's how I see it.
It's like practically satire to be like, I just want to keep trying to re-enter the army. You just reminded me of like Dean Cain joining ICE.
No, he goes in under an assumed name and he just wants to do grunt work. He doesn't want to learn how to fly the planes. And it's like what he says in the movie, just give me work that most any man could do. He gets like all these special privileges where there's no explanation around. For example, he has the permission to leave the RAF at any time.
He's just like a weird old dude being a mascot for the RAF.
Except he's not a mascot. He's this guy no one's ever heard of who he's pretending to be. And it all looks very fishy. And when people question it, someone at the top of the chain of command is there is like, yeah, it's T. Lawrence. We don't know what's up with him. Just like humor him. He's also like an ordinary soldier who can go have lunch with George Bernard Shaw or Winston Churchill any day that he wants to. And he will re-enlist in the RAF another time after this particular bout. I don't know what he would have done in World War II, because there are some people who are only good when they're in crisis management mode, and the rest of the time they don't know what to do with themselves. And I think that's him. I'd like to think that his old buddy Winston could have talked him into doing something useful in the Second World War, but we'll never know because motorcycle accident. Because he wasn't wearing a helmet. So actually, Lawrence had the most positive effect in terms of leading people to ask questions about, should we maybe go come up with crash helmets or something? Should we be riding motorcycles without helmets? So that is the next 15 years of his not that long life.
Okay. So let's do a little bit of awards talk here. This one, a lot of awards. It was nominated for 10 Oscars. It won 7, including Best Picture and Best Director. It also won Golden Globes and BAFTA awards. Peter O'Toole was nominated for Best Actor. He lost to Gregory Peck, who was playing Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird. Peter O'Toole would go on to be nominated many times for Oscars, and he never won. And I don't know how I feel about these two performances against each other, because I think Gregory Peck is so transcendent playing like oopsie daisy racist Atticus Finch. I will say he very much left it all on the table in this role. And clearly like worked really hard. This is a really physical performance. He's in practically every shot of this film.
Yeah, and he's playing someone who everyone says he's hard to get. He's opaque, he's distant, and he doesn't have family. He doesn't have the things that make him easily relatable.
This movie is huge in what I call the Listicle Industrial Complex, which is to say, like, there came a time when media was like, we have no news this week. Let's make a list so we can sell ad space. People love lists. This movie is always somewhere between 2 and 10 on those lists. Usually losing to Citizen Kane, or Vertigo. It's 5th place on the AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies. It's 30 on the list of most inspiring movies from the AFI, which, okay. I wasn't super inspired.
Should I want to go ride a camel or?
I mean, I think if you shut the movie off immediately after he rescues Useless Guy, then you are inspired. But like everything that follows it is kind of a huge bummer. It was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry in 1991. In 2001, the magazine Total Film called it as shockingly beautiful and hugely intelligent as any film ever made and faultless. Everybody loves it. A guy named Robbie Cullen, a writer for the UK's Telegraph, ranked it as the greatest biographical film of all time, which strong disagree based on the tenets of biography.
What would we say was the best?
Lincoln
and Milk are our 2 favorites still, I think.
It depends on what are we defining it? What are we defining biography's greatness?
Yeah, and you know what? Let's not go there tonight.
Let's not. So anyway, it's beloved and it is recognized as a legendary piece of cinema, and it deserves all of that.
I didn't jot down any choice dialogue because we were at the Paris Theater, and you don't use your little light up pen at the Paris Theater.
I had one that I've thought about, which is Ali says, "Truly for some men, nothing is written unless they write it." I loved that. I loved the moments in the movie of early triumph where they are sort of celebrating this idea that the future is unwritten. I like that reminder. Everything does go badly after that. But anyway.
You reminded me of how I love Omar Sharif trying to no, you really are special.
I love him in this movie.
Yeah.
So dreamy. What a great performance. Anyway, should we rate this thing?
Sure, let's rate this thing. Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher on how we score movies?
I'd be happy to. We rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important in most films, but specially tailored to specific issues in biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing. Would you like to go first? Or shall I?
I will go first, Sarah. My ratings for outward appearances, makeup, and hair, I gave it a 7 because I had to take something off for all the little things that make us uncomfortable now, but not too much off for that because that would be judging by today's standards. I try to get in between. For acting and casting, I did give it a 10. For passage of time, I gave it a 9. Costuming, 10. Quality of the script, 10. Accuracy, 4. Storytelling, 10. Production value, 10. Production, direction, decision-making, 10. And for Do We Care, I gave it a 6.
Fair.
My final score came to 8.6, but I'm using the by because it's Lawrence of Arabia, so 9.6, which I think it deserves.
Outward appearances, 8. Acting and casting, 10. Passage of time, 7. Costuming, 9. Quality of the script, 9. Accuracy, 7. Storytelling, 8. Production value, 10. Production and direction decision making, 9. Do We Care, 6. If I could give production value 20, I would. My score came out to 8.3. I'm using my by, bringing it to a 9.
So that is 9.45, which feels low for Lawrence of Arabia. But life isn't fair. So Lawrence of Arabia, your final score comes to 9.45, and you have earned a second opinion.
Second opinion is the element we stole blatantly from How Did This Get Made?
The prize for scoring above an 8 or below a 4 is that you get to hear us make fun of IMDB reviewers who disagreed with our assessment of the film. So I would like to go first with a review that stayed with me for some reasons that I will raise. 1 out of 10, the worst highly rated movie in IMDb, written by Mitch McConnell on August 23rd of 1999. Boring, in all caps, self-important, you don't care about the characters. Even granting that the cinematography is okay, it's like watching an internet camera focused on the desert 24 hours a day. 37 out of 96 people found this helpful. I immediately thought, who had access in 1999 to a camera trained on the desert for 24 hours? This review was written at a time when internet cameras were in their infancy. I'm wondering what kind of crazy DARPA privileges Mitch McConnell had in 1999 to be able to watch an internet camera that would work for 24 hours and was aimed at the desert. As I remember it, we were all on dial-up with significant delays. I wondered if my memories of 1999 were off, so I looked, and according to a 2010 FCC report, in 1999, Figure 1, dial-up was 95% of total connections. Even in 2003, 35% of American households were still on dial-up. So this made me wonder if Senator Mitch McConnell wrote this review. Who but a senator would have had access to an internet camera that actually worked for 24 hours in 1999, presumably for spying on people, which may have been why it was aimed at the desert? Mitch McConnell doesn't strike me as being an early adapter or terribly web savvy, although I could be confusing him with Orrin Hatch in this case. Using your real name and a web handle, despite somehow being able to watch a 24-hour webcam that actually works in 1999, seems like something that an out-of-touch geezer with power would do in that year. I wondered if Mitch McConnell has ever been recorded offering an opinion on Lawrence of Arabia, but decided, no, I am not going to put time into figuring out whether Mitch McConnell likes Lawrence of Arabia. He doesn't strike me as someone who would hate it, because he's a super conservative guy who I imagine wouldn't mind white saviorism or care for academic post-colonial theory. Not today or 26 years ago, but the comments are just that the movie is boring, not about its political content. And I will be linking to this FCC paper in the show notes.
Okay.
So do we think Mitch McConnell wrote this review?
It's very possible. He does strike me as someone who would not enjoy a movie. He doesn't seem like he enjoys much of anything except being racist.
But none of that has anything to do with Lawrence of Arabia. It just, I was really bugged by who would have had access to an internet camera that could actually work for 24 hours in 1999.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay, Sarah, do you want to read one now?
Sure. I'm going to read most overrated piece of terrible cinematography, which was written by Denise 888 on March 2nd, 2013. Why on earth is it considered one of the best? Can anyone explain this mystery to me? The film is just awful. Outdated, slow, cliched, skewed, biased, unrealistic, propaganda-driven, silly at times, overtly naive, and very, very long. Peter O'Toole. Can he play? He can. Not in here. Here, his uneasy array of homo hints, blank stare, evidently weak acting, very unnatural emotional display, shallow delivery, and generally very irritating mimics. That is the end of that sentence. Which is to say that it does not end as a sentence. Omar Sharif and Alec Guinness are no better with their laughable gestures, bad lines, and unconvincing acting. This is a very overrated piece of time movie, which belongs to where it should be, in the past, as a result of very poorly executed epic saga, which drags and dies along. My advice, watch it, but then drop it. There are better movies in this world. This one is a real waste of time. 79 of 123 IMDb readers found this helpful.
Why?
I don't know.
Thanks, Denise888. I will read 1 out of 10 most overrated movie ever. Written by Fred Barnett 4 on June 18th of 2005. This movie was awful. It was at least 2 hours too long. It would have been decent had they not shown the crossing of the desert in real time. Geez, talk about a waste of time. You could have watched half the movie with fast forward on. I don't understand why they felt it was necessary to spend so much time focusing on the dialogue-free desert crossing rather than spending the time developing characters or better explaining the political ramifications of what was occurring. Oh, dude, if they'd done that, it would have been like 10 hours before the intermission. The overall quality of the movie was greatly depleted by this. It would be interesting to see a remake of this film, but only if it were at least an hour shorter. 33 out of 67 people found this review helpful. Like, all the stuff that he's asking for, you want to explain the Middle East in 2.5 hours, Fred Barnett?
Have fun with that, Fred Barnett 4.
Yeah, good luck with that one, dude.
I would like to add here also that Robert Boltz, the co-writer, was brought on as a secondary writer for this because Michael Wilson, as screenwriter, was struggling mightily with not getting bogged down into the weeds of these kinds of details. I thought I had notes for David Lean, but clearly some others have some stronger notes. Like, I'm always going to be impressed by anyone shooting stuff that's real, as well as David Lean.
Do you remember we talked about, there is that passage on my favorite book ever written about film, Final Cut, Dreams and Delusions in the Making of Heaven's Gate by Stephen Bach, where he writes about how they attempted to get David Lean to finish Heaven's Gate so they could fire Michael Cimino, because everyone had been saying, oh, it looks like if David Lean made a Western. But he doesn't say the director's name, only earlier they'd given this description of Heaven's Gate, oh, it looks like if David Lean made a Western. And then he says that they go to talk to directors to find someone who takes over, and the director that he's speaking to asks him, what does it look like? And they said, like you went and made a Western. And then the director, who process of elimination must tell us is David Lean, says, so when I was quite early in my career, I did that. I took over a film where the director had been fired and the actors were super, super resentful. It's not a good scene to be on, and I'm not doing that again.
And honestly, like, that's another fine example of a movie that is a direct descendant of David Lean's style of filmmaking. And I mean, people love to hate on Heaven's Gate, and I cannot possibly disagree more strongly with that position. Heaven's Gate is such a beautiful movie.
Stephen Bach has some critiques of it that, like, it's hard to, like, care about what's going on, but it is gorgeous.
Yeah.
So, other stuff that you should watch instead, you should watch Lawrence of Arabia, and if by any chance, please watch it on a big screen if the chance ever comes along in your life. Other recommendations: this movie is a sausage fest about a man who hated physical touch. But if you have a moment, read up on two remarkable women connected to T. Lawrence, Gertrude Bell and Sarah Aronson, both of whom have had very good biographies written in this century, and also a book that I do not normally like thinky books. I am a hopelessly middlebrow layman, so I only like books with plots like history or novels or biography. But in connection to the subject matter of tonight, I would like to recommend, if you are interested in a fresh, nuanced take on post-colonial theory, the book on settler colonialism, Ideology, Violence, and Justice by Adam Kirsch. I really liked it, and so did my dad.
I will say also see this movie, but also see, I mean, we've name checked a couple of different things in here, but like see Heaven's Gate, give that movie a fair shot. I would recommend watching that. I would recommend watching Dr. Zhivago and Bridge on the River Kwai.
Yeah.
Also, it would also highly recommend watching the short documentary that we're posting in our comments about David Lean that I watched.
So, Sarah, can you please take us out?
I'd be happy to. First, some housekeeping. Our podcast baby has matured, and we have launched a Patreon, simply an effort to defray some of the costs associated with bringing our show to you, including platform hosting, recording, research. We do have to occasionally order a book off the internet. Sometimes we pay to see movies. We are currently offering shoutouts and access to our awful first 3 episodes to anyone who chips in for us. And with that, we'd love to thank Gates, who signed up.
Thank you, Gates.
Thank you, Gates. And if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is at Biopic a Podcast Story, so do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Please also check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official episode ratings for all of the movies we've done so far. And if you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com. Our theme music is by Ben Patch. The intro is his song Slater Cannonball, and the outro is Spring Breakers, and you can check him out on Spotify.
Yay! Tune in next week when we will be talking about Wonderland, starring Val Kilmer in his 4th time on the show.
This is a Sarah movie.
Oh, yeah. This movie is starring Val Kilmer as John C. Holmes, and it's episode 69.
Yeah, we did that.
I'm sort of mortified.
I'm sort of mortified too, but also I'm kind of like, you know what? Lean into the dad jokes. What else is there? Good night. I will talk to you soon.
Good night to the earnest and the cynical, and good night, Sarah.
Good night.